This is not meant to be a biography. Rather, it's a character study, a bit of a look at one of the most well-known figures in science fiction. Even people who have never watched Star Trek have likely still heard of him, Captain Kirk. I've been asked to talk a bit about him, but rather than making this a cold biography, I want to look at who he is and how the events of his life may have shaped him into being that person. And I believe the place to start is a young Jim Kirk on the planet Tarsus 4 and his encounter there with Kodos the Executioner. For the purposes of this, the life of Kirk seen in the last two Star Trek films will be excluded, since they lived radically different lives. The incident on Tarsus 4 no doubt had a significant effect on Kirk. An exotic fungus destroyed most of the food stock on a colony world of 8,000 people. The head of the colony, believing that help would arrive too late to save them all, decided that half the population would need to be sacrificed, a decision based upon his own twisted views of eugenics. We don't know the precise details of the situation, but it can likely be inferred that Kirk was on the planet either staying with relatives or on some kind of youth activity, as he was 13 at the time, and the other survivors we've seen appear to be the same age or younger. It's likely that Kirk was connected to some group that was chosen for execution. He was separated out due to his age, and witnessed Kodos' swift massacre of the rest. I don't believe it was Kirk's immediate family, though, as George was not among the witnesses, and his father definitely was not among the victims. It's my feeling that this incident had a profound effect on Kirk's personality. Kodos was decisive, confident of his decision, swift in its execution, and certain that circumstances offered him no alternative. His exact words, "I see no alternative." When Kirk found himself split into two beings in The Enemy Within, the one with morality lacked those traits. No confidence, no decisiveness. In the mind of Kirk, traits like that were synonymous with his own darkness, yet without them he wasn't effective as a captain or leader. I believe that, for Kirk, he had seen what that could allow, if unchecked, so he refused to allow that. Those qualities in him demanded that they be tethered by a strong moral code. At the academy, Kirk faced the Kobayashi Maru test, which confronts the student with a scenario. Do you abandon a ship full of innocent people to certain death, or do you violate the treaty and enter the neutral zone, only to have your ship destroyed by Klingons? There are no alternatives. You must choose whether to attempt a doomed rescue and lose the lives of your crew, or to abandon those that you are supposed to aid and defend. Famously, Kirk cheated, reprogramming the simulator to allow him to succeed at the rescue without losing his crew. The reason given is that Kirk doesn't like to lose, that he doesn't believe in the no-win scenario. We could put that down to ego, certainly, that Kirk hated the idea of being forced to pick a wrong answer. But I think this is a sign of how those qualities in Kirk came together. He had seen up close and personal the human cost of choosing death for some and life for others, and was determined never to accept that as the only solution, to always, always seek out the better answer. This need provided an impetus for Kirk to develop lateral thinking skills. His ability to defeat Spock in a game of three-dimensional chess demonstrates that, and his ability to improvise under pressure. This would prove to be one of his most defining characteristics, his ability, when confronted by a serious threat, to quickly devise a counter-strategy and implement it. This has led to the assertion, as in the reboot film, that Kirk is a leap-before-you-look kind of man. But that's selling him far short. Kirk can be quick, but that doesn't make him recklessly compulsive. For instance, in the Corbomite maneuver, when faced with a threat of destruction, to not only offer a bluff to oppose it, by saying that it would cause the attacker to likewise destroy themselves, but couched in a way that made it even more believable, by stating that their lives hold little value to them, so they would prefer just getting on with the destruction rather than a tedious countdown to it. Of course, it couldn't be farther from the truth. Kirk naturally has the human respect for life, but he is quite emphatic about it. It's again hard to imagine how one can't feel it all the more after the atrocity that he witnessed, that life is so precious. When Sulu comments on the death of one of their crew members, it was a terrible way to die, Kirk could only comment, "There are no good ways." Even when he believes he has come face to face with Kodos, who has evaded judgment for his crimes by faking his own death, Kirk admits that if he had his way, the man would be executed on the spot. And yet, Kirk doesn't lay a finger on him, because unlike Kodos, he does value life. As he would later say, man rose above primitiveness by vowing, "I will not kill today." And even though he believes an officer should be prepared to lay down their life to avoid violating the prime directive if it's necessary, when it comes to the lives of others, Kirk is far less willing to accept suffering, unnatural oppression, and death being the purpose of the prime directive, but rather that it's a form of protection. For example, in "For the World is Hollow and I Have Touched the Sky," he has a far different set of priorities. When it's pointed out that his actions would be a violation of the prime directive, he dismisses it as if it was ludicrous to think that these people being changed is somehow worse than allowing them to be killed. That's notable because even though you might be saying, come on, all Federation officers are going to have a respect for intelligent life, his position here puts him in stark contrast with others that we've seen in the same type of situation, and in their minds the prime directive trumps life. And these were officers who identified themselves more as diplomats than military officers, while Kirk himself insisted upon the reverse, that despite being an explorer, he was a soldier, not a diplomat. Because Kirk didn't see being a soldier as being opposed to life. The role of a soldier is not to kill, it's to protect, and Kirk looks for the way that he can accomplish the latter without the need to resort to the former. As he once said, "The only thing that's truly yours is the rest of humanity. That's where our duty lies." And yet, despite all of this, Kirk doesn't try to separate himself from situations where he might be forced into a no-win situation, be forced to order death for others, directly or indirectly. On Tarsus, he was helpless to do anything but watch, and nothing upsets Kirk quite like situations where he can't take action to stop a wrong. Nothing except those who choose to do so voluntarily. Those 2 points seem to clash especially with Errand of Mercy, when the Organians refuse to resist their Klingon oppressors. It takes on a particularly interesting point when he discusses the way that they wage war in A Taste of Armageddon, that they've sanitized war, but in doing so have removed one of the strongest oppositions to war. The greatest deterrent to war is knowing how terrible a thing it is, which again brings it back around to that point about life. Those most opposed to war are usually those who have taken part in it. But because Kirk detests standing by and doing nothing while an atrocity takes place, he is prepared for battle or even war if the alternative is even worse. There's no doubt about necessity, only at most uncertainty that he will make a mistake and cause a catastrophe, though Kirk only confides that to his closest officers. But again, it is by necessity, and necessity only, that he does so. Even when dealing with a planet-devouring life form, he was prepared for the worst, to have to destroy it, and yet lamented that it might come down to that rather than finding a peaceful solution, believing that the life on the planet must be preserved at all costs, but that no effort should be spared in preserving the creature's life as well. And as often happens, they found it. But when all else fails, when there is no choice to make but the hard call, Kirk wouldn't shirk from that duty, despite the actions that he'd witnessed from Kodos. He was no doubt prepared to order his crew into situations where death was a possibility, even a likely possibility, but only after exhausting all other possibilities, and never crossing the line between likely death and deliberate murder. For Kirk, as long as there was a chance, no matter how remote, life was possible, and that avenue would be pursued. Even if he had been in Kodos' place, he would never judge for someone to die deliberately for the sake of others. He would risk lives in 1,000-to-1 chance, certainly, but not allow intentional death just because cold mathematics told him to. Kirk's closest friends are naturally Spock and McCoy, despite the two of them being far, far different from each other. McCoy naturally appreciates that Kirk is a strong moral center and a good heart, aspects that McCoy himself cherishes. And Spock no doubt finds it intriguing and agreeable that Kirk can take a course of action not immediately apparent through logic, but in the end proves a practical solution. As someone who's had to face both human emotion alongside of their Vulcan philosophy, Kirk is no doubt interesting to see in action. Likewise, Kirk seems to depend upon their advice on similar grounds, Spock with the head and McCoy with the heart. For instance, in the issue with the planet-devouring life form, it's McCoy that he speaks to as he struggles with the moral choices that he faces, and it's Spock that he speaks with about finding workable solutions to the dilemmas that they face. Kirk's outlook is connected to what seems a passion for what life has to offer. Perhaps once again a side effect of how close he came to execution, to know how precious it is and what it has to offer. He is notoriously quick to engage with attractive women, a pursuit that seems has left him a bit of an old-fashioned perspective from time to time. He enjoys adventure. It's possible his lead-from-the-front approach is unusual, especially given how later captains are explicitly discouraged from joining away missions in unknown territory. And yet, for Kirk, that was the ground state, the default. I'm going down, who's coming with me? And naturally, he's infatuated with the Enterprise and exploration, saying with excitement that risk is our business. He isn't precisely impulsive. He seems willing to move quickly to embrace an opportunity that arises, personally, professionally, whatever, but usually with the good sense not to allow that to interfere with his responsibility. While he's the quintessential starship captain, married to his ship and devoted to duty, he's a more complex man than that suggests, and no doubt the primary reason that the Enterprise itself became a legend.